Good morning. Welcome to Shaar Habitachon. See you. Hope some of you will get on early enough so we can get started. And then we'll be able to get into some very interesting Shaar Habitachon concepts. Morning when you get on, if you can tell us where you're coming from, where you're watching from. Boker Tov. Good morning. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Good morning, everyone. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Yeah, oh, Francesca can hear me. Good morning, Francesca. Boker Tov. Good morning, Chava. Good morning, Naomi. Hi, everybody. Good. You can hear me. Great. Okay, sometimes the connection isn't always working, so I just need to make sure that we're good. Okay, Boker Tov, everybody. Today we have a lot to unpack. We're going to be discussing a very high. Good morning, Helga and Esther. Good morning. Hi, Barb. Good morning, Boker Tov. Good morning. Yes, good. Okay, we hear a lot of you online and live. That's good. We're going to start off with, of course, before we get into Shaar Habitachon, we'll start off with our Tehillim. Oh, Corinne at the airport. Hi, Corinne. Hello, Lisa. Hello. Good morning. Great, Corinne. Have a safe trip. Okay, Corinne's on her way to see her children, so that's always beautiful. I'm going to turn to page chapter 20, and I'm going to, meanwhile, say all the people that we're praying for. Anyone else you want to add, please feel free to put them into the chat box. Okay, Sarifka Bas Rechel, Yisrael Ben Esther Golda, Chana Nachamadina Bas Esther Hadassah, Henya Tzipora Bas Chaya Chevet, Tuvi Moshe Ben Peril, Iran Bracha Bas Shendel Leah, Rivka Bas Chafitza, Leah Bas Chafitza, Yaakov Moshe Ben Necha, Yehuda Bas Sarah, Yitzchak Moshe Ben Rachel Reza. Please put down anyone's names you want to sit down for. Good morning, Stella. Good morning, Rosalie. Yitzchak Moshe Ben Rachel Reza, Tzipora Hinda Bas Rachel Miriam, Sarah Bas Chana, Chana Devar Bas Golda Basya, Menucha Bas Emmanuel, Dalia Bas Yehudis, Hannah Tova Bas Tova Basya, Moshe Ben Miriam, Leah Bas Etel, Nami, Sarah Bas Tzipora, Sarah Bas Penina, Do Ben Tova, Malka Bas Razel, Leah, and Yeshua Ben Leah. We have Shoshana Bas Sarah, Ora Bas Sarah Hinda. Good morning, Helga. Good morning, Bev. Good morning, Tova. Looks like we have a nice full morning here today. And of course, it goes without saying that we are davening today for, hi, good morning, Giselle. We're davening for the Jews in Ukraine that are still running, that are now settling in very harsh conditions, in hostels and in hotels, living out of their suitcases. It's not the freedom that we have today here. And we have to daven Hashem should bring healing to Ukraine. Good morning, Arlene. Good morning, Darlene. Good morning, Moshe Ben Leah Esther. So having all that in mind, good morning, Ava. Good morning, Elise. Having all that in mind, we have Rachel Bas Sarah, Aliza Bas Sarah. We have Hannah that's joining us. Tova. There's a few more names I can't see. Okay. Good morning, Shirley. Good morning, Hannah. Okay. If I missed out any names for Tehillim, feel free to put them down into the chat. So we're still in chapter 4 of Shaar Habitachon. Sorry, we didn't say Tehillim yet. Barbara, good morning, Barbara. Good morning. Okay. Give you tzedakah. Chapter Chaf, let's say with a lot of kavanah. Lamanatseach mizmor David, Yancha Denabi Amsara, Yisagefcha Shemel Yaakov, Yishach Ezrecha Mikodesh, Mitzi Yisadeka, Yiskar Kom Chasecha Valasa Yidash Nesela, Yitin Lachacha Vecha Vachotzas Chayimale, Rana B'Shu Secha V'Shem Elin Nidgo Yimal Adonai, Kol Mashalasecha, Ati Atati Ki Yashia Den Mashicha, Yani Mishmikacha B'Gurus Yeshayaminai, Ela v'recha v'ela v'asusim anachnu b'shem Adonai Eloheinu naskir hema korban afol v'anachnu kamen v'nesaydad Adonai Hashia hamelech hanenu b'yom karenu Rebecca bas Frida Ephraim ben Ruth Orit bas Esther Orit bas Esther and Donna bat Chaya. Yes, Corinne, definitely let everyone at Terminal 3 enjoy a little bit of Shaar Habitachon. What could be bad, right? Okay, so before we start Shaar Habitachon today, we're going to be talking about a very interesting and I found maybe disturbing part of chapter 4. Now, it's real life, and it's something that I guess many of us have to deal with. But on page 161 on Shaar Habitachon, we're dealing with the title, Dealing with Enemies. Now, I was preparing this last night, and I said to my husband, like, why would this have to be part of Gates of Trust? And we got into this conversation that people really do have enemies out there, and the people that dislike them. And there are people that can bring unto others what we call it ayin hara. Anybody ever heard of that word before? Ayin hara. Anybody know what that is? Sometimes when we talk to other people and we'll say, how many children do you have? And you'll say, kanayin hara, right? There should be no ayin hara. What does ayin hara mean? Okay, I see some people give me a thumbs up if you heard it. Anybody know what ayin hara means? You either give me an emoji or, Helga says an evil eye. Naomi, yes, an evil eye. Yes. Now, do you think ayin hara is part of Jewish thought? Do you think there's any mention of ayin hara in our tradition? Yeah, like really? Did you believe you could believe it? That there's such a thing as ayin hara? Someone else could give you the evil eye? Yikes. Well, actually, yes. In fact, on Motzei Shabbat, when we make Havdalah, we read right after Havdalah a beautiful, beautiful song. It's the conclusion of Shabbat. It's called the Yitin Lecha, and it's a farewell song to Shabbat. And one of the chapters here says something about being careful with what you have because God gives blessings to things that are in secret. So the concept of ayin hara is the idea that when we flaunt something or when we talk about it too much, when it's out of the hiddenness, then we could, God forbid, be subject to an ayin hara. I'm going to start off with a story. I'm not sure if it's true. It might be chapter 91. Okay, we'll look into that, Naomi. Thank you. This story might be a parable, but it is, or a metaphor, but I'm going to share this story. Many years ago, there was a little girl who was born blind. She grew up, of course, lacking the ability to see life the way we know it, to see rainbows and sunshine and birds and flowers and all the beautiful things that we have in the world. And it caused her a lot of anguish. The older she got, the more upset, and then eventually she became very self-centered and very narcissistic. I mean, could you blame her? She grew up and it was impossible for her to enjoy life, and it was impossible for her to get married. Nobody wanted to marry a blind girl. She always inquired about an eye transplant. And they told her, yes, but because of the times, we're way before the time of an eye transplant. And maybe 20 years from now, there'll be something for you. They're just beginning to investigate this brand new scientific miracle, and not for another 20 years. And there's a huge waiting list. So, unfortunately, you're going to have to live with this. Anyway, she resigned to the fact that she would just be blind for many, many years and she will never get married. But one day she met a young man who really appreciated her on a deeper level. and they developed a beautiful relationship. And eventually he proposed. He really took a liking to her, and he proposed and asked her if she wants to marry him. And she jumped and said, of course. And you could imagine this was an interesting and maybe an abnormal relationship, but they did get married, and he promised to take care of her, and he promised her that she would have a beautiful life with him. And in fact, she was the happiest woman on earth. And you can imagine that she appreciated everything he did for her, from bringing her breakfast in the morning, from making her 3 meals a day, for choosing her clothing. And every time they took a walk, he would describe, he would take her to a beautiful country, and he would say, this is France, and this is what you're seeing. And he would make everything come alive through his words. And they became very, very close. And their closeness grew from day to day, right? He loved her deeply, and he did for her whatever he could. One day he comes home, and he tells her that he has great news. He was notified that she's not going to have to wait 20 years for a transplant. Rather, she was pumped up on top of the list, and that they are willing to do new experimental surgery, and she was now put on top of the list. And she was overjoyed, ecstatic beyond her words. She felt very, very lucky. And she thanked her husband for working on this opportunity. Indeed, a few months later, she was put on the operating table. And before she went in, her husband told her something. He said, my dear wife, I am so happy for you. I am more happy for you than anything else in the world right now. But I want to tell you that when you come out of surgery, I don't want you to be shocked, because when you wake up, you're going to notice that I'm a blind man too. And without even giving too much thought, she was whisked away. She began to cry, but she was whisked away into the transplant, and that was that. The transplant began, it ended with success, and of course, after several weeks, she had to wear those bandages, and she was finally able to remove her bandages. And sure enough, for the first time in her life, she opens her eyes, and she sees the beautiful world. She sees the sky, the clouds, the sunrise, the sunset. She sees the birds and the trees and the beautiful mountains. She sees the grass. She sees children. She sees people. She sees all these things that her husband had described to her, and all the books and the movies that she'd heard. She was now able to see it. And her joy knew no bounds. Her joy was limitless. And now she started to live. In the beginning, she took care of him with tireless dedication. She took care of every single thing he needed. She was devoted. She was involved. She was alert. Anything he needed, she gave him whatever he needed. And she took him wherever he had to go. She took him on trips. And she was extremely dedicated to this man. Because look at that. He was also blind, and yet he gave her the opportunity to have the transplant first. Wow. But as time went on, life became more and more difficult. She was feeling very frustrated. And for the first time in her life, she could finally travel and see the world. And now she had this appendage. She had her husband's impediment. And it really, really began to bother her. And she started becoming less attentive and less excited to take care of him. And she began to resent her marriage. It was unfair to her, she felt. She never had a chance to enjoy childhood or teenage years or university years. She never got to see the world, and she couldn't do the traveling and take him. She didn't have what it takes to take him to do the travels. And she wanted to live in the fast lane for at least a few months. She just wanted to live it up. But her blind husband needed too much. She needed to take care of him night and day. And he was, after all, a blind man. She spoke to her therapist. She said to her therapist, I don't know what to do. And the therapist said to her, you must decide what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And the woman decided to end her marriage. She didn't have the guts to tell him, so she called him up at work. And she said, my dear, I want you to know that I appreciate you and I love you and I care for you, but I'm really growing to be resentful for you. I really am resenting the fact that I have to take care of every single one of your needs. And I want to live. I want to live my life. I want to see the world. I want to explore. I want to travel. And I can't do this now because you're so needy. And I want to end this marriage. He listened silently. He didn't say a word. And when she returned home, he told her, if this is what you want to do, I'm going to give you the divorce. The day of divorce happened. And they went to the court, to judges, and they had settled on the agreements. And he moved out of the house and she kept the house. She came home. She found a letter on her pillow. And I'm going to read the letter that was on her pillow. It says, my dear beloved wife, as you know, I always loved you and cherished you. After your request for a divorce, I immediately complied with your request. After all, love can't be forced. And if you felt that this marriage was stressing you out and causing you to resent me, I cannot change that by force. I understood it was time to let you go. I will miss you dearly, and I wish you the most beautiful, exciting, and fun life you wish yourself. In conclusion, I will ask you one favor. Those eyes of yours, treat them well. Take care of them. For not too long ago, those eyes were mine. I loved you too much. I could not bear to see you blind. I gave you my eyes. And that is why you didn't have to wait 20 years. Please take care of them. Wow. 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 I remember the first time I heard this story, and I wasn't sure if it's true, if it's a metaphor, but I remember the first time hearing this, I thought, I can't even put myself into this man's situation. To give his eyes. But let's talk about the power of eyes. We read in the Chumash every single morning, in the Siddur. Yes, Corinne, believe me, I cry too. And I have a big lump in my throat now. We read in the Shema every single night before we go to sleep and every morning when we wake up. In the part of Vayomer, it says, Hashem gave us the tzitzis. We should look upon them, remember them. And then Hashem says this, you shall not follow after your heart and after your eyes, which you go astray. Lo sasuru acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem, asher atem zonim achareihem. Do not follow after your heart or after your eyes by which you go astray. There's so much in the Torah about eyes. Anybody want to tell me in the chat, why do you think there's so much emphasis on the eyes? And I know, Arlene, before you said, I was hoping that there's no such a thing as an ayin hara. So today we're going to discuss, is there such a thing as an ayin hara? Is there such a thing as an ayin hara? So, you know, in Hollywood, the movie stars are always talking about the red string. And they're very into it, right? Ward off the evil eye, buy yourself a red string. And as you know, you could pick up a red string for $5, a few shkalim in Cave Rachel. Here you could go to a stores and pick them up for $25. Probably in Hollywood, you could buy them for $150. People are always talking about the red string to ward off the evil eye. I remember my mother saying to me, my little girls were all dressed up so beautiful. She said, Goldie, put them on a right to bendel. Put them on the red string. And I would say, Ma, I don't believe in the red string. I don't believe in ayin hara. So let's unpack. Is there such a thing in Jewish context? Is there a belief? Can the eyes of someone else ruin you? What's the deal with the eyes that the Torah tells us? Don't go after your eyes. Don't be lustful. Arlene says her mother made her have a red bendel in her purse. Right. So there's so much of this. And You all, I'm sure, how many of you have heard of the red Bengal? How many of you have heard about the evil eye, the Ayin Hara? Come on. You're Jewish. You heard about it, right? Am I right? Okay. So where does this come from? So there's a funny story about this 93-year-old guy that was up. He was at court and he had to sign for oath. And the judge said to him, "Sir, how old are you?" He says, 93-year-old Kanai Nahara. So the judge says, "No, how old are you?" He says, 93 years old, Kanai Nahara. The judge is starting to get angry. "Man, how old are you?" He says, "I'm 93 years old, Kanai Nahara." Finally, the lawyer, who was Jewish, went over to this old man. He says, "Yidala, Kanai Nahara, how old are you?" He says, 93. So, as Jews, like Carol says, my aunt used to call my kids miskite. You know what? So Carol, tell us, what does miskite mean? Why do you think she called your children miskite? Because we didn't want to give these glorious, over-the-top compliments to our children, because people were always worried about ayin hara, right? They called them ugly. Carol, listen, I remember your Daniel. He was the most gorgeous little boy. But I could see why she called him ugly, because she didn't want to ayin hara. This is hilarious. You see, those of us that are on this right now, this chat, right? We're in our 40s, our 50s, maybe our 30s. And we know all these funny things from our parents and our grandparents, because there's really a lot of base for it in Judaism. My husband had a grandmother, and she really was very into this ayin hara thing. So she would always tell my husband as a little boy that one of her friends, this lady, she really gives an ayin hara. So when you see her, you make sure to run. And my husband was a beautiful little boy, blonde hair, blue-eyed little guy, and he was smart. And he just remembered hearing stories about ayin hara. So one day he was coming home from yeshiva. He must have been 8 years old, he says. And the grandmother was sitting there and she was having tea with the woman that was known to have ayin hara. So my husband's bubby gives my husband this look like, so my husband decides he's going to come in limping. And as a 7-year-old, he limps. And this old lady goes, "Oi, oi, what's this?" She goes, "Oh, this is my very, very ugly grandson. He has a limp." And that night, she says to my husband, "You're so smart. You were able to make sure that you didn't get ayin hara from this lady." So I know I'm teasing you here, but what's the deal with the ayin hara? I mean, my husband's grandmother was a very, very righteous woman, and your aunts and your grandparents were smart. So did they believe in ayin hara? And someone here said about the chamsa. Is that what it is? A chamsa has that eye, right, to ward off the evil eye. So what is it? In fact, the Talmud says something very interesting. The Talmud says that 99 out of 100 people actually die because of an ayin hara. So what is this? And do we have to make sure that those who we call our enemies, right? He talks here about how to deal with the enemies. How do we deal with these enemies to make sure that we don't get their ayin hara? Now, it's interesting. Is it a baba maisa? Right? You all know what a baba maisa is, right? Is it a baba maisa, or is there a basis in our Torah, in our Talmud? So we know that Jacob, when his 10 sons went down to Egypt to get food during the hunger, what did he tell them? He said, "Do not go through the same gate." I don't want anyone to say, "Wow, who are these strapping brothers? Look at them, tall, dark, and handsome. Who are these boys?" Right? He didn't want ayin hara. He said, "Go through different doors, different gates, entrances to Egypt, so that you won't get an ayin hara." I remember I have a friend. She lives in New York, still one of my good friends. When her parents would walk, let's say to shul on Shabbat, the father walked on one side of the street and the mother walked on the other side, and each one had a few kids with them. And when I would say to her, "Why aren't you walking together as a family?" she would say, "My father doesn't want anyone to give an ayin hara to our family. They should say, 'Wow, there comes like the Rosenberg family. Look at them all walking. What a beautiful family, a father, a mother, all these beautiful children, right? So, and I remember thinking, I was a little girl, maybe 11 years, I'm thinking, like, what's the big deal? But maybe she knew, maybe her father knew something. So the Talmud actually says that, and it quotes this story, that there was a very brilliant young Talmudic scholar, and his rabbis asked him to give the opening Torah, Dvar Torah, to the yeshiva. And his father said, no, I don't want him to give this Dvar Torah. And they said, why not? And the father said, because I only have one son, and I don't want him to have an ayin hara. So the Talmud has a lot of these stories that seem very reliable because the Talmud is the oral tradition, and that there's something there. And as I was mentioning to you in the blessing that we make on after Shabbat, so it says in Hebrew, Yitzav Hashem itcha es habracha ba'asamecha. The Lord will command the blessing to be with you in your storehouses. And the commentaries explain from this, and the Talmud extrapolates from this pasuk, that a blessing comes to something that is hidden from the eye. And the pasuk that's quoted here in the Talmud, Ein habracha b'tzoya ela ala davar samay min ha'ayin. That blessings come from something that is hidden from the eye. What does that mean to you? Put it down in the chat. What does that mean to you? That blessing comes to you from something that is from, a blessing comes to you when it is hidden from the eye. What does that mean to you? So the Talmud explains that when we show off too much of our wealth, our wisdom, our children, our property, our goods, and we show it off, then the bracha recedes. The bracha gives us things that, the bracha comes to us when we keep it low, keep it under wraps, right? What excellent, Beth, when other people don't know about it. Good, Darlene, being humble and modest. And it's hard because we have sometimes, we have grandchildren and they come to shul or we go to a wedding. We want our friends to see it, and yet we don't want to show off. We want to be humble, as Darlene says, right? We want to be humble. So how do we sort of juggle, that the blessing comes to us when it's hidden? Good morning, Linda. Good morning, Denise. We get blessing when something's kept under wraps. But is it possible to get ayin hara? So the key that someone said here, which was excellent, was Darlene said, being humble and being modest. We have, Baruch Hashem, many blessings in our lives. We don't have to hide it and keep ourselves and our children hidden in the house and, God forbid, introduce them to our friends. Or possibly an enemy, right? Someone's jealous. You don't know that they're your enemy, but they harbor this resentful feelings against you. But it's about the way. Excellent, Arlene. I want to post something on Facebook, change my mind, and I don't post. Exactly. Perfect, practical idea. We want to promote something, something we just got, a new piece of jewelry, or got a new home or something, and we want to show it off. And we have to think to ourselves, wait, maybe I should be humble about it, right? Even when they count for a minyan, they know they need 10 people. They don't scream, oh, do we have 10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, they say, Hoshia es amecha uvarach es nachlasecha urim v'nasim ad olam. That's a pasuk with 10, right? We say a pasuk because we don't want to count. God didn't count the Jews. He counted coins, right? And we read the parsha that God, or promote Kedusha by candlelight. Beautiful. That's right, Becky. We counted, God would count the Jews by coins, right? We spoke about Parsha Shkalim, that the Jews each had to give a half a shekel. Even God didn't want to count and give a number. here Hashem said, give me shkalim. So we know that someone's eye can, God forbid, make jealousy. Someone's eyes looking at you or someone else with their good fortune can arouse lust and jealousy, which is an evil eye, which is what enemies, God forbid, can do. So we have to now take a look at what is an eye. The story I just told you about this blind girl, the power of eyes. You wake up in the morning and you make the morning blessings. Thank you, Hashem, for Pokech Ivrim, opening the eyes of the blind, talking to ourselves. We're thanking God. Thank you for opening my eyes this morning. I wasn't able to see last night because I was sleeping. You gave me back my sight, my ability to see and to see with a good eye, right? So we have to be careful that we use our eyes for good things and we don't use our eyes for lustful things or for things that aren't ours, jealousy and desire. We have to be careful. Why did Hashem give us eyes? If eyes have such a power, we have to make sure that we use our eyes appropriately, right? And then on the other hand, I can't live my life worrying about if everyone's going to stare at me. But let me give you a little analogy, right? This guy just got brand new Maserati. I mean, the Maserati is quite a beautiful car, but this man goes, I worked hard. I worked hard. Not like my neighbor who stayed home all day. I worked 20 hours a day. I hardly slept. I deserve a Maserati, right? So what happens? The neighbor next door sees the Maserati coming in and out of the driveway. You're revving up the engine. You're speeding down the street with this loud noise. All the neighbors pop out the window and see, hey, there's Joe with the Maserati, right? With the Maserati. So what happens? He gets jealous and he cries out to God. He goes, what's wrong with me? Why don't I deserve to have such beautiful cars and such beautiful things? And now what happens is this becomes a conversation and Hashem looks down and says, do you Taka deserve this? Do you deserve this? And Hashem judges us more critical. So what we want to know about Ayin Hara is we don't want to create an environment where others are looking at us and saying, why does she have that? Why does he have that? That brings Hashem to look down and say, oh yeah, you really do have a lot of great physicality, a lot of great materialism. Do you deserve it? So Kabbalah says to us, don't arouse the jealousy in others through your things. Be humble, right? Be humble so that you don't elicit more judgment from God, because light from someone else's eyes, the viewing of someone else's eyes, can bring down a lot of judgment. At the same time, what Kabbalah also tells us is that the power of the eye can create a reality. We have to be able to realize that our eyes, our sight, and our words thereafter really can create someone else's reality. We know that eyes can be a weapon. And we have to realize that eyes and our thoughts and our words as well can create real weaponry. And we have to be careful the way we see things, the way we think of others. By the way, did you ever try this? You're standing, let's say, at a large event and you see someone and you think it's a friend and you want to connect with them, but they're too far for you to tap them on the shoulder. So you stare at them. And you stare, and eventually that person turns around. Has that ever happened to you? It happens to me. If I'm sitting in shul and I see my husband sitting there and I want to catch his attention about something, like maybe he should remind the women that there's a class today. So what I'll do is I'll just stare at him, and he looks up and he stares back at me, and I'll give him my motions with my hand. So eyes, without even verbalizing, have a very huge power. And we know that everything in this world is zeh, l'uma zeh, Does announcing one's joy at the marriage of her children invite the evil eye? Where's the line when we're celebrating happy events? Excellent question, Carol. So if it's done, and this is the key, and I mentioned before, if it's done humbly and like this old man said, Kanai Nahara, you're saying it humbly and you're saying it without arrogance, then it's a beautiful thing. And you're always right. After every time you say something that's beautiful, or how many grandchildren you have, or when are you going on vacation, or you just came back from vacation, you just say Kanai Nahara, recognizing that Hashem has given this to you, and you say Baruch Hashem, right? Say Baruch Hashem. So when you bless Hashem and thank God for Hashem, then you are eliciting blessings in a humbling way. That is how we do it. So even they talk about weddings, the whole idea of making ostentatious weddings, overdoing it. A wedding has to be beautiful, but there are weddings that cost $40,000 and there are weddings that cost $400,000. And I know some very wealthy people that will still not make very, 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 I don't know if spitting a poo-poo-poo is Jewish, Arlene. I don't think that comes from any Jewish sources, by the way. I know Jews do it, but I don't think there's any source for that. But that's very popular, Arlene. So I know people that make very beautiful weddings, but low key. They don't want people walking out and saying, why does, Mr. Hamilton or Mr. Shapiro make these ostentatious weddings? He could give that money to tzedakah. Why do you have to, okay, his daughter got married, but why does he have to waste so much money? Who cares about the 7-course meal? So it's Carol, you don't want to announce or create an environment where someone's going to look at you with the evil eye. If it's ostentatious, if it's over the head grandiose, if it's way more than what others are doing, play low key. I know that friends who buy beautiful, beautiful homes, and they make sure that their homes are used for guests, fundraisers, women's events, hosting other people, making someone else's bar mitzvah, making someone else's bris milah, saying, I have a house, use it for good. Invite people into my home, make a Shabbos dinner there. When they have a home for that, what do people say? They have a beautiful home, but look what they're doing with it. That wards off an evil eye. You know that my husband told me a very, very interesting thing, that they say in the Talmud that when you want to ward off the evil eye, you take your right thumb in your left hand, and your left thumb in your right hand, and you hold your hand like this, and you say, I am from the children of Yosef. Okay, see this? You put your right thumb in your left thumb in your right hand, and your right thumb in your left hand, and you say, I am from the children of Yosef. What does that mean? So Yosef was blessed that the ayin hara could not affect him. He almost had like this iron dome. And his brothers tried to kill him. Potiphar threw him into jail. Everyone tried to do damage to Yosef. But Yosef had a blessing. And what was it? That the ayin hara would not penetrate him. As I said, like the ayin hara, like the iron dome. Why did he deserve this? Because when Jacob came with all his family to greet Esav, his mother Rachel was there. She was a beautiful woman. Yosef stood in front of his mother to protect her from an ayin hara, from Esav, so that Esav shouldn't see her. And because he put his life on the line to protect his mother, because harm could have come his way, he was blessed that no ayin hara would ever befall Yosef. So when you want to protect yourself, you just say, I am from the child of Yosef. But also more than that is to create this iron dome. And what is the iron dome? Torah and mitzvahs. Living a humble life of Torah, of mitzvahs, and bringing Hashem much nachas. Wishing you a beautiful day, full of blessing, full of ayin tov, full of good friends, and only good news. Have a great week.